So when I started out Polytechnic, I actually enrolled into an engineering course and I didn't do really well. I was one of the worst students that there was, and I decided at that point of time that I couldn't continue like this. And that's when I took my first leap of faith in a sense. The one module that I actually scored well for was Python. And I decided, okay, let me enroll into an IT course instead. So I transferred my courses. And that was when I actually faced one of my biggest setbacks at my 16, 17-year-old life, which was that I'm now 1 year behind my peers already. So back then, I would say my mindset was still very adolescent. I hadn't really thought about, what are the long-term effects of this. But at the same time, you can kind of call yourself a bit of a failure because, well, you're now behind your peers, you didn't do that well. But then that comes that kind of spark, that passion, that desire to want to do more and do better. It only motivated me to do better.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm your host, Dawn Budget Babe, and author of Take Back Control of Your Money. And I'm joined here by Alex.
Hi, this is Alex. You can find me on socials. I am your Nest to Next coach, where I support people in different life transitions, whether it's spiritually, emotionally, or financially.
In Singapore, most employers say that they want innovators. But the problem is, and as a parent, I feel this deeply, the education system still celebrates rule followers. At the same time, young people are starting to learn to take initiative earlier, sometimes encouraged by their own parents, sometimes spurred to do so by some of the content that they see online or elsewhere. And they do this through projects, side hustles, or even startup challenges. But yet, interestingly, many of these young people don't quite see themselves as entrepreneurial despite doing that. So in this episode, which literally sits at that crossroads, we want to unpack that further because we say we want creativity, but do we really reward it? And more importantly, what does it take to build a generation of builders, employees who yet think like founders? To help us go into this topic, we have brought together, thanks to our producer, a young builder together with a mentor, and we're going to connect the dots between these two. So before we do that, we'll have our guests introduce themselves to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ezekkious. I was a graduate of Nanyang Polytechnic's Diploma in Business and Financial Technology. I actually started my own company and we sold it recently. But how we realized that we had something was through a lot of school projects and also a lot of mentorship and guidance along the whole way. Recently, I also managed to win the NYEA POL-ITE Entrepreneurs Challenge. That was also done with ACE Singapore, and that's how I'm here today. I've also had many experiences during my Polytechnic years trying out different exploits, and I'm really happy to be here today to share more about them.
And I understand that you are now serving your national service.
I am serving my national service.
And you just graduated, right? Because you were nominated valedictorian for the class of 2025.
Yeah, so it was really funny. I graduated just last year in 2025. I was nominated valedictorian, but I had the opportunity to represent Singapore under a fellowship that was awarded by the US Department of State called the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative Academic Fellowship. And I was in the States for 2 months, enjoying my time learning more about policy, governance, and what it's really like to be there in, I would say, a country where we didn't really know much about when it comes to startups and everything like that. So I got to be in the midst of it all, and I really did enjoy myself. And that helped me to also figure out what I wanted to do with my company and bring that to the next stage as well.
And for someone so young, it's incredible. Congrats, by the way, for selling your company. I don't think most people at this age and stage would have been able to do that.
And just out of curiosity, what was the business of that company?
We actually started a company called Virage, spelled VIRAGE. We were doing voice phishing simulations, and we built it as a educational and training company in the topic of cybersecurity. We were helping companies to solve their human risk needs and evaluate whether their company was ready to be certified as a SME in Singapore. Because every single organization in Singapore has to be cyber ready, and we help companies to achieve the Cyber Essentials mark as well.
We want to hear also from Patrick, our guest. But before we do that, Patrick, could you introduce yourself to our audience who might not be as familiar with your work?
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm the CEO of ACE. ACE stands for Action Community for Entrepreneurship. So ACE is the National Trade Association for Startup in Singapore. Our mandate is really to see how we can work alongside our partners, the government agency, our Institute of Higher Learning to inculcate an entrepreneurial mindset among our Singaporean, and more importantly, to see how we can enable the growth of Singapore-based startup. So we have a lot of fun working with youth, and we have a lot of fun working with also founders who are keen to see how they can expand beyond Singapore and grow their business as well.
So, Ezekkious, when you first heard the word entrepreneurship, when I understand, what do you think as a younger version of yourself as a child? What did that mean to you?
You know, when I first heard the term entrepreneurship, it was actually on a sitcom that I watched in secondary school called Modern Family. And in that setting, in the sitcom, the father of the family, Jay, he was a business owner. And from that, I got my first insight into what an entrepreneur was. But in a sense, it was about running a business, making money, but also taking care of people all at the same time. And as I grew older, I never really understood how someone would get into that position, you know, because we have books, we have classes, but they don't really teach you about entrepreneurship. And I think that when I first found out about what entrepreneurship was, the concept itself was quite freeing because it meant that you could just have fun and do what you wanted and try to do something that was beyond the norm. And as a kid growing up, I was quite defiant in class. So I didn't really enjoy going by the book or going and listening to what my teachers were saying.
And your parents are not business people.
Oh no, my parents are not business people. My parents were from Malaysia. They came to Singapore, raised my family, and then after that had my brother and me. So we grew up here. They both work in banking, but no, we never really had that exposure as a child.
So, did you then feel that entrepreneurship perhaps wasn't meant for someone like you? Because, like you said, in that TV show, that sitcom on Modern Family, the dad was an entrepreneur, but yours were not. How did that switch happen?
I think growing up, you don't really see yourself as an entrepreneur in many environments because, especially here in Singapore, we don't get enough exposure towards creative problem solving and having to kind of fend for ourselves in a scary environment, which is kind of what entrepreneurship is going into the unknown. But in Singapore, you do have a lot of things laid out for you. And so when I grew up, I was just going by the book, following what my parents were telling me to do, and going towards what we define as success as a whole in Singapore. And I felt that, you know, maybe I wasn't meant to be an entrepreneur, but that spark kind of happened when I was in Polytechnic and I started to come out of my shell. I tried new things. I went for my competitions, and some of them really gave me the exposure to think that I could solve problems and potentially there was more than just a one time fix, such as a case competition or hackathon where I could really take my ideas and bring it forward.
Patrick, from your mentoring experience, what signals a young person's initiative?
I think that's a very difficult question because we have to probe inside the head of the youth and ask them actually what are you looking for in terms of your career, in terms of your exposure and your fulfillment in life. Very often, I just want to attest to what was mentioned earlier. It's really about at which age do we expose our youth on what entrepreneurship is about or what being entrepreneurial is about. Um, I guess the system has changed a fair bit over the years. Not speaking on behalf of MOE, but it's true. I remember when we start promoting entrepreneurship in Singapore, that was in mid 2000s. Those of us who grew up in a different era, our parents will say, well, go to college, get a good degree, and you're done for life. You know, a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, work in a bank, it works. Or worst come to worst, get a stable job, and stable job, aka in most cases, is really about getting a government job, which is an iron rice bowl back then. So when we promoted entrepreneurship in mid 2000s, there wasn't a lot of activity happening. Not in secondary school, not in JC, not in poly, and not in ITE. But since then, I think we've seen quite a number of schools putting in place a structure program, exposure, challenges, immersion program to really help the youth be more exposed to what being an entrepreneur is about. But of course, all this to the youth is like, okay, I'm going through the motion, it's a module I need to take. Unfortunately, I'll go through it. Um, I guess it's really about speaking to a smaller percentage who still feel that maybe I want to go through a more structured, career. rather than taking on a tough journey where I have to fend for myself, making sure that what I do is of value to customer. So to me, it's really about what is provided as part of the system that allows the youth to be exposed such that they know there's an alternative path. And out of the 100 students, maybe 5, maybe 10, and they decide to do something, that's where I think the second part of the support is very important, giving them the additional push, being a mentor, exposing them to different parts of industry, helping them with the business development. That's why I think in the earlier phase of their startup development needs the most help. So the long answer to your question, but I guess at the end of the day, it's really about what the youth is looking for. And hopefully we seed that idea at a very early stage that there are different pathway to life, to a career rather.
So for many young people, entrepreneurship doesn't always start with a business. Like in your case as well, it starts with a moment, either a project or a competition, sometimes even as simple as a school assignment, where you then realize that you can build something that did not exist before. So Ezekkious, what was the first thing you ever built that made you think, wait, this doesn't exist, maybe I can turn it into a business?
I think the idea of finding something that doesn't exist is really, really difficult because as a student who I would say I reflected a lot, especially when it came to ideas, you got to think about why the business doesn't exist or why that idea didn't come forward before. So whenever we are doing a competition, a project, we always thought about why didn't anyone build this yet? So I always look back, and I realized, oh, it didn't work this way because the business model wouldn't work. And I think that was the case for the earliest thing that I actually started on. It was this project called Cordy. I discovered it online on Reddit. I was scrolling through Reddit looking for opportunities, and I saw this site called Cordy, CORDY.SG. It was this opportunities platform designed for youths. It had everything on it that my school didn't have. So I decided to show up for one of the events. You can just register. It brings you to a link outside of the platform. And from then, I met the founder. And it was through that meeting I actually began to find some interest in the whole startup environment. And that's when I had conversations, and somehow I ended up working with him on Cordy. And that was my first exposure towards social entrepreneurship, actually. And it was then I started to build and I started to think, oh, these are the problems people are facing. These are what we can do about it. But at some point, we also realized that sometimes business can't be sustainable. And that's when I realized, okay, there are different ways of doing things as well. We wanted to continue Cordy in a certain manner, but then we realized we can't earn money from this. So eventually down the road, they turned into a non-profit. And by then, I had left for a few years already, and I was already doing my polytechnic education.
Right. So for you, the spark was in working with someone who had done it before, not for too long, but who had done it, who was doing it. And in that sense, shadowing someone and seeing it in practice and then realizing that, hey, it isn't that difficult.
No, but
I
he
could
got
do
his
it.
hands dirty, right? And I think
Yeah.
by getting his hands dirty, that's where that curiosity or that spark continued to grow for you to realize that, hey, this is something that I like to do, and I probably am better at it as well than your other peers.
Yeah, but it's a very important insight for parents or even employers who are trying to groom the next generation or their workers like this. Because his story has just shown that you need to let the person try. Because before that, it is all just perception. Maybe someone may think, oh, entrepreneurship is not for me. It's too difficult. I couldn't do what they do. But the moment you get to actually do it in some capacity, you start to realize, oh, I can do this. It's easier than I thought. So as a parent, I'm actually getting some ideas like, yeah, I should probably make my kid do like small projects so they understand whether it's for them or not for them. And then employers can also cultivate them because everyone who says, we want people who think like founders, who own the project that they're taking on. But are you giving them these chances to actually practice? Or are you just getting them to micromanaging them and getting them to report to you all the time? So you're not creating that agency while demanding that you want that. So that's actually really interesting. Patrick, when you hear that story, what stands out to you as the key mindset that employers and mentors look for today?
That's a very good question. I guess it's really the fire burning in the youth or in the entrepreneurs. They see an opportunity, they see a challenge, and they say that, hey, this is something I can tackle. And this is something I can undertake so that I can bring a better product, a better services to market. a lot of time, I think the characteristic of being an entrepreneur, being very resilient, being a hustler and stuff like that, you can't teach them in school. But I thought as parents, as employers, something that we can think about is really, do we give a space, a safe space, whereby, our employee, our children can say that, hey, don't worry, experiment, try something. We're not going to prejudge you. We're not going to give you clear instruction. And we're not going to tell you this thing called, we've done it before. This is how you should be doing it. Just follow my instruction. So when you are put in that kind of environment or culture, it's very hard for an employee or for children to think about, okay, should I, be brave enough to step out of my parents, OB marker and say that this is something I'm going to do radically different. So I feel as a society, sometimes we are very structured, and that structure sometimes inhabits doesn't help innovation from happening. Which is why I told some of our young people, actually, we are in a different generation today, and we are hard-coded. People in my generation are hard-coded in a certain way, but you can show a path gently to the different generation and say, hey, certain things can be done differently. Give them the opportunity to try. And once you have tried that, and the confidence is built, the trust is built, it's easier for the employer or the parents to give you more freedom to do certain things. So when I say that, it's really about the entrepreneurial mindset, not necessarily being an entrepreneur, but giving the individual the freedom to roam, to explore, and to do something that is that has not been done before.
We all know among our own friends that there will always be certain people who will take more initiative than the others, right? The friend who takes the initiative to organize and set the date of the meeting, the location, the one who calls the rest of us out, the one who pushes us in project work. But is that something innate, something that is in their character, or is it something that you think ACE and the workplace can actually nurture?
It's really down to the Chinese saying, right? 天时地利人和. It's really the place, the individual, and the environment you're in. So I will just talk about the environment, the place. Those are easy to control. An organization culture, you want to have an innovative culture or you want to have a restrictive culture. Those are the DNA that the boss, the company can think about putting together. But the people part, I think, is really about how do you inculcate, this freedom in your employee that, hey, yes, we'll do a performance appraisal. Yes, you'll be judged based on the outputs of your work. But the how part, how do you achieve your KPI? How do you achieve what you're supposed to do? Those are, I think, more flexible. And for employers, sometimes say, you are doing sales, this is how you're going to do it. You should do go by the list, or you should go and do some engagement with industry and stuff like that. But to me, those are well and tested. But perhaps a young man like him may say that, hey, in order to do sales, we should do a TikTok. Yeah, maybe some of the SME targets say, TikTok, what is TikTok? Does it work, etc. So we can do different, or we can encourage, employer to let the employee to have some freedom, explore things
I was
in a
hearing
safe space.
Ezekiel's story earlier, and he talked about how he was looking for projects to do, right? So that's that innate initiative that he had. Do you think, or do you feel that this initiative is a part and parcel of a person's personality, or can it be further trained?
I don't think anyone is born an entrepreneur. It's really what you're exposed to, the environment, the culture, and perhaps also a little bit of peer influence that make you become an entrepreneur. There are those, obviously, whereby they can't find a job, they want to do side hustle, they want to at least have a decent living. And I think those are more out of necessity.
Different motivations.
Different motivation. But like in his case, it's really he sees that I've seen a value proposition that I can provide to the industry. No one is doing, and this is something I can turn into a business model.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
I love that line. No one is born an entrepreneur. It's like no one is born a parent. We always say like, I'll be a parent when I'll have kids when I'm ready. But we're like, no, you don't know.
You're never ready until you try.
You're never ready to be a parent. But it's in the same vein, you're never ready to be an entrepreneur because being an entrepreneur, you will have to deal with changes. Nothing is ever certain. And it's the fact that you have to deal with all of that uncertainty and just pull through it that defines an entrepreneur, or whether that person gives up being an entrepreneur and then goes back into employee life. How do you handle failure or uncertainty differently now compared to before when you had this mindset shift?
If I can go back a bit in time and give you a bit of context about my own journey. So when I started out Polytechnic, I actually enrolled into an engineering course and I didn't do really well. I was one of the worst students that there was, and I decided at that point of time that I couldn't continue like this. And that's when I took my first leap of faith in a sense. The one module that I actually scored well for was Python. And I decided, okay, let me enroll into an IT course instead. So I transferred my courses. And that was when I actually faced one of my biggest setbacks at my 16, 17-year-old life, which was that I'm now 1 year behind my peers already. So back then, I would say my mindset was still very adolescent. I hadn't really thought about, what are the long-term effects of this. But at the same time, you can kind of call yourself a bit of a failure because, well, you're now behind your peers, you didn't do that well. But then that comes that kind of spark, that passion, that desire to want to do more and do better. I think that when I encountered my first failure and my first big failure in that, it only motivated me to do better. And sometimes you see that as a good source of fuel, a positive source of fuel, or it can be a negative source of fuel that drives you to keep working harder and harder, maybe to the point that you burn out. So it was a constant struggle in trying to juggle how you viewed success, how I viewed success for myself in my results, in my grades, and in how I conducted myself. And I realized that when I found myself to be scoring well in school after making that shift in mindset and scoring well in my grades, doing projects outside, then it came to me that, that fuel is now exhausted. There's not really much reason for me to, keep doing all these things because I've really kind of done well enough. And then that's when I had to change my mindset again and try to identify positive sources of fuel, positive sources of motivation that allowed me to continue pushing, to want to build Viraj and to want to push myself to even apply for the States in the first place for that program. And it was through my desire to actually try and solve problems. I really found that I enjoyed solving problems. And I think that kind of motivation wherein you get from doing things that you enjoy doing things that bring you a lot of fun, a lot of joy, and allow you to meet a lot of new people, because that was what motivated me. I think those things carried me forward, and it can be different for everyone. But to me, that kind of mindset, you kind of only get it when something big happens. It's kind of a wake-up call. And that was when I changed courses.
So in other words, when you had that first failure, as you define it, you let those emotions and those inner voices, the negative ones, get to you for a while. Whereas now you see it as just another problem to be solved, another feedback to be improved on.
Definitely, it's like back then it was, because you never experience pressure like that. You never experience that kind of feeling when you're young because you're so sheltered. But once you grow older and you start thinking for your own self, then you realize the weight of the decisions that you make. And then when you start thinking and seeing these problems or seeing these big failures as just things that you can overcome, it becomes a feedback loop where you just improve yourself, identify how you can get better, and then slowly just try to make incremental steps towards solving that problem.
And Patrick, do you see this as a common trait amongst the youth that you've mentored?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can see the spark in their eyes. You can see that the never say die spirit. Yes, I may fail this time round, but I'm sure if I talk to more people, I try further, I try harder, I will be able to overcome some of the constraints that I face. So I think that's a resilient part among the youth today. Maybe it's a smaller cohort that I see because I'm looking at entrepreneurs. For the non-entrepreneurs, I think it's also how do we inculcate this mindset in them, which is equally important, if not more important.
Is there a difference between thinking like an entrepreneur and actually being a founder of a business? Would you see that as being the same, or is it different?
essentially, if you look at the DNA of a founder, what really is the DNA of a founder? It's really they see opportunity, they try very hard, make something work, they bring value to the market. So these are the traits of the founders, which frankly, even if you are not a founder, if you're an employee, you can have the same trait. I'm undertaking a project as an employee. My boss said you have to bring in this amount of money, and this is how we're going to, the resources given, you have to make it work. Well, it's a mini project, it's a mini business on its own. And how do you make sure that the KPI your boss give you, you tell him it's not good enough, I'll double your KPI because I believe I can do a better job. I think that's the kind of spirit we want among the youth. It's not like I'm following instruction, but well, you just tell me what you want. Let me figure out how I can do a better job for you as an employee.
I can resonate so much with that because for all of you listeners out there, I wanted to share a personal story of my own. I think people tend to think that being an entrepreneur or being a founder looks like a certain way, that you have to go out there, you need to take risk, you need to either give up your full-time job or you do it as a side hustle. And there is, like, it looks a certain way in their mind. But you're spot on. Even the projects is like being an entrepreneur, but just defined in a different way. So it's all about that mindset framing. And I remember in my career, there was a few years ago, you've heard this story before, but when the government policy changed and we had to create something brand new that did not exist before, that project was given to me and I fully embraced it. To me, that was like, it's an opportunity for me to behave like the owner of a business. It's a small project, it's a small part of the business, but I am owning this right now. I don't own the profits. I own it in my salary and I'll get a bonus if I do well. But the framing then was that this is my baby. I did not create it. It was not a company. It wasn't even a brand. It was just a department. But it was my baby. And because I felt so strongly about that, I nurtured it like I would my own kids. And I treated it as if I think it would have made no difference if my boss had spun that out as a separate company and made me the CEO. I would have still worked in the same way. And I think that's important for some people to realize because I've heard employees tell me, no lah, I'm an employee because I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a business owner. I'm not cut out for business. But no, the project itself can be like a business.
In fact, I'll push back if I hear something like this. Because as an entrepreneur, he has a team he has to feed. He has to make sure that they have enough money to run the business. As an employee, well, I'm given the company resources to make it work. That risk is taken away from me. So what's stopping me from being more entrepreneurial than an entrepreneur to make the project happen?
And the stakes are lower.
It's
The
a
risk is actually lower.
limited downside, but also limited upside. But that's okay.
Limited upside for now.
Yeah.
But later on, like we talked about in the last part of this episode, that spark can follow you through to something else.
Yeah, maybe there's another aspect also. Youth this day, they may not just be purely looking at income or salary. They're looking at satisfaction. Am I making a difference at work? So given such opportunity, such project where you can really go further, why not? I think it's something that they will enjoy rather than taking maybe $5,000 per month as a salaried person.
Exactly. And I would also argue that maybe it's kind of true that not everyone is cut out for business. I give this hard truth to some of my closest friends and people I love because I'll tell them immediately what are the trade-offs. Like if you start your own company, if that company gets sued, it's you. Good luck. Right? If you start your own brand, you have no visibility. You're fighting against so many others. What makes you so confident that you can elevate your brand to the next level compared to just taking on or working for an already established brand?
If I may add, we always talk about the upside of being an entrepreneur. You know, the Silicon Valley model, I want to be the Elon Musk of the world. But we don't talk enough about the failure of starting your own business.
Yes.
In fact, a huge percentage of startup fail within 5 to 7 years of incorporation. The failure rate is very high. And for some of these founders, there's a larger implication. Financially, family obligation and stuff like that. I've heard several cases whereby the family got to mortgage a house because they have to pay off all the debts. So I totally agree. I don't think everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. Because when they consider all the risks involved, you may just turn cold feet and say, hey, I'm not cut out to be one, but I can still be entrepreneurial.
Yes, but they can adopt an entrepreneurial mindset.
Exactly.
And entrepreneurial characteristics and the founder-led attitude towards what they have
Mhm.
been given with a lower cost. Lower cost, lower profits. I think it's fair.
So
High
let's-
risk, high returns, right?
Let's take all of that and put that in an interview room, right? Where Patrick, you're the hiring manager, and Ezekkious is the candidate, right? And a little bit of a
He's getting ready
role play
there.
here, right? So, Patrick, maybe you can just go ahead and present the questions to Ezekkious. Like, what would be the first thing that you would ask?
So, Ezekkious, what do you want to do in your career actually?
I am here for the job interview for ABC company X job, but I would really like that the environment that I'm placed in would really give me that challenge, would really give me those opportunities to grow, learn, and find out more about what I enjoy doing. I think, frankly speaking, it can be hard to understand what I want because right now, at where I am in life, I'm kind of also understanding and finding out what I'm good at. So if this was, for example, a first job, I would probably say, I really am interested about this industry. This is what I studied about. This is what I studied for. I have gotten these grades. I took these modules and I've done these projects here and there to be able to prove myself as a good candidate for the job. And I think that would, for a first job, set me apart. But at the same time, it seems like we need to do more now as well. So if you were asking me, then I would say my startup experience has given me that insight as an operator. I've saw how teams worked. I saw how deals were made. I've learned how to manage businesses and manage money on my own. And in that sense, I face the problems that any company faces. And I did that with such a small amount of time frame. And that exposure has really taught me a lot. And I plan to bring that to the company as well. And in that, I believe that you will see my worth because of the amount of output I have already shown previously when I took ownership of my own company.
So, would you prefer to continue your entrepreneurship, aspiration, starting another company, or would you work for another person?
After my time as an entrepreneur, with that experience, I realized that there were other things that I could do. And I realized that with the amount of capital, with the amount of resources that a company provides, I could actually use my talents in that area further as well. Because when I was starting out on my own, I was limited also to my connections, to how much outreach I could do, and the team that I had with me at my startup. But when I do join a company, and if I were to join your company, I know that I'll be able to make full use of all the resources that you have and leverage that in helping to generate more value for you.
So, how can you make our strategic outcome 10 times the way that I look at my vision?
Wow. I think that's a hard question, honestly. If you were to ask me that during a proper interview, I mean, definitely you have to study what the company does and everything.
Exactly.
But without knowing the company's core strategy and core values and who their clients are, I think it's quite hard to give a good answer. But I would say that it just matters that the individual is committed, takes ownership, and is willing to do the job and get the job done.
Yeah, I used to have a friend who went to the boss. She told the boss, boss, you set me a KPI. It's a 1-year KPI, but your KPI sucks. It's too low. Imagine you are a young employee going up to the boss and say, your KPI sucks. It's too low. I'm going to double your KPI with half the time. And she did that.
Oh.
I thought that was very entrepreneurial, very brave of her because she sees that I can do better. I can do better than the company. I can do better than the boss. So I think sometimes when we look at the youth, it's really, do we see them as having the guts and the grit and say that I can do better and this is how I'm going to have a company?
Wait, did she not add a second part where I think your KPI sucks, it's too low. If I can hit 2x of that in half the time, will you double my salary?
I didn't hear that part of the story, but I'm sure she's given a
It
good
would have been
bonus
a,
at the end of the year.
missed opportunity if she didn't ask for it.
Don't know how to negotiate.
That's another skill that we
Yeah.
have to learn.
Yeah, because a lot of time when we interview people, the standard answer is, I know what your company is doing. This is how I think I can fit in. But perhaps the employer can also ask, how can you make my company double or 3 times or 10 times the size that it can be? And that's where we think about, whether this employee is really about ambitious. It's really about thinking through how he or she may stay a longer time in the company and trying to make the company as great as it can be.
But Patrick, so you were the interviewee. You're the interviewer, he's the interviewee. What do you think of his response as well that demonstrates this builder mindset?
Well, same observation. I thought he's very cool. Maybe because it's not a real interview.
Yeah, it's not.
But that aside, he was very cool. He was very thinking through, well, I don't know you enough, so I'm not going to BS you. I'm just going to give you a response which I think is okay for now. But maybe behind his mind, he's thinking, okay, he set me a challenge. The next time I'm going to see him again, this is how I'm going to make the organization 10 times the size that it can be.
But we presented, or you presented one question where you said, why don't you go and do another business, right? So as an employer, you could potentially be taking a risk by taking him in for 1 year, maybe maximum 2, and then off he goes to do something else. Of course, within that 1 or 2 years, he would have contributed greatly to the business. But would you be willing to take that risk as opposed to taking someone else whom you know would stay with you for 5, 10, 20 years?
And even worse, when the entrepreneur leaves,
He
they
steals
might
your
even
business.
copy. Yes.
Well, if it's easily copied, I guess you should not be in business.
That's a great one.
Yeah. But jokes aside, I guess in the business of hiring people, you are always looking for the best talent. Best talent can add a value add to what you're doing, and of course, bringing your company to the next level. Now, once he is in, he joined. It's for the boss to convince him. You still have a great future here. It's not about 1 year stay or 2 year stay. Perhaps, we can think about spinning off a new venture where you hate the new venture rather than letting go of him because we don't know he's a flight risk. So I thought that should be the mindset rather than, not hiring him.
I would hire him, and if he proves himself, we do a JV, we start something
Absolutely.
else. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a great mindset. So for bosses, if you've always been trying to fight back against this new shift of finding employees who are founder-led and have this mindset, well, I hope Patrick's answer gave you something to think about. You don't have to fear what has not happened yet. But if you do decide to get them in, you can control the outcomes, which can be in many different ways, and doesn't have to be that person going away to take your business.
Yeah, and I think that we'd like to end today's session by having some input from both of you on what do you think current school programs as well as initiatives can better prepare the youth to be builders, to be founders, and to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, Ezekkious, maybe we can hear from you as well. What would you think? What do you see? Because you're very fresh out of school. What did you see was lacking that you wish you got from school, but you did not?
I think two great questions actually. So first was, what do we see currently in schools, education, in the environment that would help build builders? And the other question was, what have I seen in school and what my personal experiences have told me as well? I think they are quite similar in the fact that when I went through Polytechnic, I thought that the curriculum would be very freeing, would be very experimental. In a sense, there was some aspect to that in which the projects that we did, we could kind of go along how we wanted to run it. But at the same time, when we are in that environment where our grades mattered so much, because at the end of the day, we are still in our current society quantified by the grades that we get, the GPA that we get, in order to move on to the next stage of life. And for a place like Polytechnic, where getting to uni is difficult, I think most students' natural next step is to try and go to uni after poly as well to further their education. But when you take so many risks, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, more often not they don't, your GPA might be affected. And I think that when we place such a big emphasis on that, it can also affect a student's outcome and the way they perceive entrepreneurship as well. When they want to be builders and when we want to build builders in a school environment, I think currently polytechnics are really doing a good job. I've seen a lot of new programs in the 3 years that I was there.
Patrick, what do you see in the current school curriculums and programs that can help foster this, or any ideas on what you think should be added in so that we can have more builders?
I'll just talk about the add-on because I think as mentioned, polys, even the IT are doing a great job in providing, a lot of exposure opportunity to the students. But I always feel something that's missing in Singapore is really international exposure. Singapore is very unique, we are in a very safe zone, everything is very structured, you press a button, something will happen. But in an environment whereby you are not so sure, things are a bit chaotic, that's where you have to really be very creative. So I always feel youth, if they have an opportunity, maybe it's through poly internship program overseas, just go out there 3 months, 6 months, be immersed in the environment, observe what's going on in the society, how entrepreneurs function, what the thinking of the culture there and stuff like that. That exposure, I think, is quite valuable to a youth because they know that Singapore is quite different. And when that happened, you realize that maybe through that exposure, they can think a bit differently. They can look at the world a bit differently. In fact, many of the unicorns today, they are started by graduates or even undergraduate who went through such immersion program, specifically in the NUS Overseas College Program, or NOC for short. So that kind of exposure, half a year, 1 year in a different environment, do a lot of good for the youth in terms of exposure. Um, I would say that there's also something I heard recently. There are some culture, there are some friends when they come from overseas to Singapore, they realize that Singapore is so structured. They say that in different parts of the world, you really have to fight very hard to be heard, to be seen, to be at the top. And it's a huge, population trying to get to the top. Yes, we think that Singapore is a pressure cooker, but in some other country, it's even worse. And which means the mentality, the hunger, the mindset is very different. So I really feel that you should be out there, expose themselves to different environment, different society, so they have a greater appreciation of the world out there. And also, when they come back, they can be a bit braver and more adventurous.
And those are some really great insights.
Yeah,
So thank you for both of you to coming down here or spending your time with us to share with us and our listeners on how a builder mindset looks like and how that can be fostered through experience at the workplace and even in the schools. We hope that you have found this useful, and in this age, especially as AI starts to take away a lot of the jobs that can be done by junior and middle management executives, it's worth thinking about what makes you stand out outside of AI, because AI cannot own the task or own the project or the business, but we as humans can. And in fostering these kind of founder-led builder attitudes, that might just be the very thing that sets you apart from the AI that your boss is thinking of hiring to replace you, because they can replace your execution, but they cannot replace that ownership. And that could be very well the reason why you're picked to stay on compared to someone else who does not demonstrate this attitude. We hope you found this useful. Share it with any of your friends, your loved ones who are stressing out over the state of AI and the lack of jobs in the market today, or being retrenched, losing their jobs. We hope this helps them and helps you to figure that out and go on with clarity, because as what the entrepreneurs will say, there's never 100% certainty. There's always a new challenge, but it's how we adapt to that that defines whether or not we're a builder or a follower.
If you are looking to transition into entrepreneurship and you don't really know how to, please leave me a message. I'm very happy to have coffee and catch up with you to see how I can help you and support you. If you're not already subscribed to thefinancialcoconut.com, please head on down to our website www.thefinancialcoconut.com and leave your email address there so that when the next episode is out, you will be informed.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wise and Shine. We hope to see you in the next one. And in the meantime, we'll see you on our newsletter. Thank you. Bye.